Country, a member of the rock music scene is dead. Police say in Seattle that Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of the group Nirvana, has taken his own life. NBC's Brian Williams has our report.
Kurt Cobain's body was found inside a garage apartment adjacent to his Seattle home. Dead of an apparently self-inflicted shotgun wound, police say a suicide note was nearby. He was among the most powerful voices of his generation, an originator of a music style and fashion called grunge, as lead singer for the hugely successful rock group Nirvana, which has sold 15 million albums worldwide. Kurt Cobain's tenure as a living rock and roll icon was brief and troubled. Just last month, a combination of alcohol and drugs left him in a coma from which he fully recovered. Cobain and his wife, singer Courtney Love, appeared ready to resume life at home with their 2-year-old daughter.
I think to his generation, he's the closest they've probably had to a John Lennon.
Arrested on drug charges the day before Cobain was found dead in Seattle, a suicide victim. Love was busted in Los Angeles after being rushed to a hospital for a possible drug overdose.
Love was staying at this posh Beverly Hills hotel when a 911 call went out. She was taken to a nearby hospital.
She came in stable condition, and she was discharged from the emergency room in stable condition.
Sources at the hospital told a local television station that Love mixed heroin, tap water, and a drug prescribed for anxiety. After being treated, she was arrested by Beverly Hills police and booked on suspicion of possession of a controlled substance, possession of drug paraphernalia and a hypodermic needle, and receiving stolen property. Love, who is lead singer of the band Hole, claims she did not overdose on heroin. The arrest came as Love prepared for this week's release of Hole's major label debut album. The singer has admitted to drug problems in the past. In fact, after a 1992 Vanity Fair interview in which Love implied that she had used heroin while pregnant, child welfare authorities threatened to take custody of her and Cobain's 20-month-old daughter.
Don't touch that. It's got a bunch of other people's spittle all over it.
Healthcare professionals say it's difficult to predict whether her arrest will raise new concerns.
If it isn't clearly presenting a danger to the child at the time, you can report that. Oftentimes the officials will not act upon those reports. The important issue is whether or not at the moment the child is at risk.
Love was released from jail after posting $10,000 bail. She's due to make a court appearance next month.
Continue to mourn Kurt Cobain, and last night in Seattle, thousands turned out to pay tribute to Nirvana's lead singer, who committed suicide on Friday. A candlelight vigil was held for Cobain in his hometown of Seattle, where fans gathered to remember the 27-year-old singer.
When they finally announced it was him, I pulled over, and I was there for like 20 minutes to half an hour just crying right there. Every time I hear a song, I picture him up on stage, you know. I just don't understand it, that's all.
Just 3 days after her alleged overdose, Love was in Seattle, where she stayed with Cobain's mother. At the same time, 5,000 fans gathered at a candlelight vigil to remember Cobain. The singer's widow prepared a taped message for the crowd and read portions of Cobain's suicide note. Clearly distraught, Courtney Love frequently interrupted her husband's final words to vent her own outrage.
I'm not going to read you all the note because it's none of the rest of your business, but some of it is to you. I don't really think it takes away his dignity to read this, considering that it's addressed to most of you. He's such an asshole. This note should be pretty easy to understand. All the warnings from the book Rock 101. I haven't felt the excitement of listening to, as well as creating music, along with really writing and something for too many years now. I feel guilty beyond words about these things. For example, when we're backstage and the lights go out and the manic roar of the crowd begins, it doesn't affect me the way in which it did for Freddie Mercury, who seemed to love and relish in the love and adoration from the crowd. Well, Kurt, so what? Then don't be a rock star, you asshole. Which is something I totally admire and envy. The fact is, I can't fool you, any one of you. It simply isn't fair to you or to me. The worst crime I can think of would be to pull people off by faking it, pretending as if I'm having 100% fun. I've tried everything within my power to appreciate it, and I do. God, believe me, I do, but it's not enough. I'm too sensitive. Oh, I need to be slightly numb in order to regain the enthusiasm I once had as a child. On our last 3 tours, I've had a much better appreciation of all the people I know personally and as fans of our music, but I still can't get out the frustration, the guilt, and the empathy I have for everybody. There's good in all of us, and I simply love people too much. So why didn't you just f***ing stay? Thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach for your letters and concern during the last years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody person that I don't have the passion anymore. And so remember, and don't remember this because this is a f***ing lie. It's better to burn out than to fade away. And I'm laying in our bed, and I'm really sorry. And I feel the same way you do. I'm really sorry, you guys. I don't know what I could have done. I have to go now. Just tell him he's a f***er, okay? And that you love him.
2 suicides may be related to Cobain's death. Police say 28-year-old Daniel Kaspar of Kent, Washington, near Seattle, also killed himself with a shotgun. His roommate told police Kaspar had been despondent over Cobain's death. And a teenage boy in Redlands, California, east of Los Angeles, also shot himself to death Tuesday while listening to Nirvana's music. The coroner is treating it as a suicide and is conducting post-mortem drug tests.
This struggling logging town has a bad rap.
This is a town where people are fighters and survivors.
Every block has a red light and there's a cop on every other street.
You don't understand how boring this town is. I hate it here.
Nirvana put everything on the map.
It would be nice to say Kurt Cobain had a love-hate relationship with his hometown, but as we spoke with those who knew him, the picture that formed was one of an outcast, a loner who couldn't wait to get out.
He would be shunned in a sense, you know, that, well, where do I fit in, you know, because I'm supposed to play Little League or you know, I'm supposed to play sports. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with him or nothing, but Kurt didn't do it.
Good evening, Claude Ioso of Daily World. You guys got anything going on today?
Claude Ioso has been covering the Cobain phenomenon for the local paper, the Daily World.
He struggled in Aberdeen in high school because he was a sensitive artist. And in Aberdeen, there's not that much room for sensitive artists in high school.
Of the Daily World in Aberdeen, Washington. Claude, I'm sure you follow the story of Kurt Cobain. Can you tell us a little bit about Kurt and how well you knew him?
Well, I didn't ever talk to him personally. I've spoken to his mom several times and known him, I guess, through all that I've read about him and speaking to some of his friends out here.
As far as Kurt Cobain is concerned, how far is he out of Seattle? Is he near Aberdeen?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, as far as where is his residence?
Okay, his latest residence was in Seattle. He lived right in Seattle.
And where did he grow up?
He grew up in Aberdeen and in Montesano, which is a town about 15 minutes east of here. When his parents divorced, he got kind of shuttled back and forth.
How old was he when his parents got divorced?
8.
8 years old? A little bit about his upbringing. Coming from a split home, was this a dysfunctional family, or was it something that it didn't affect him growing up?
It affected him pretty intensely, I think, more so than even many other kids of broken homes. It seemed to, from all that his relatives and his friends say, it never seemed to leave him, that the trouble that he felt from them divorcing.
Do you think that had anything to do with the type of music that he played?
Yes, I do. His mother, Wendy O'Connor, thought so also when she talked about the kind of angst that he wrote about and sang about. She felt that a lot of it came from his feelings of unhappiness over their split up.
You know, something that everybody can't seem to resolve, it is very difficult. He had a beautiful wife, Courtney, and he had a child. This was not enough incentive to live?
Well, why he killed himself, that's the real hard question. It seems to me you could pick any cause you wanted, and it was part of the mix. Drug addiction, troubles with suicide, access to guns, broken home, you name it, he seemed to be troubled by it. And I think my read on it is he was just incredibly sensitive, and that's what made his music good, but it also made it hard for him to accept things that other people might be able to get past. And his suicide note even touches on all kinds of fears he had about how legitimate his performances were, which doesn't seem like it should be that significant, but it was incredibly significant to him, I guess.
Could you embellish a little bit on that suicide note? Evidently, you've had an opportunity to see it, or you know the contents of it.
Yes, Courtney read it at the vigil in Seattle the Sunday after his death, and he talks about not feeling the rush that Freddie Mercury felt when he'd go out on stage, and he felt like the worst thing would be to continue performing when he didn't feel that rush. And so it seemed like it seems unusual that would be enough to make somebody so unhappy, but as I say, it seemed like everything could bother Kurt Cobain profoundly.
Do you think he was asking for help when he went through that episode in Rome that almost killed him prior to the suicide?
Well, I guess some of the news reports I've read indicate that was a suicide attempt there. And I don't know whether he was crying out for help. Some psychologists, I guess, know about what suicide really means, but it seemed like he really wanted to do it that time, and it was actually Courtney forced him to go into treatment after that. So, I don't know. They have a lot of. It seems like there's a lot of evidence now that he really wanted to go ahead and do it. He didn't care whether people were going to say, "Hey, don't do that." He wanted to kill himself.
This, of course, is hindsight, but was Courtney good for him? Bad for him? Did she have an influence on him? Were they compatible? Was this a happy relationship?
Well, I never knew Courtney, and I don't know much about her background, so I'm probably not all that qualified to answer that question. But I guess from what I've read and what his mother has said, it seems she was compatible for him. And that means maybe she's Mercuric, which was like him. I don't think maybe if he found somebody who was more motherly and nice, maybe that might have been better for him in some ways, but I don't think he would have liked such a person.
Growing up, was this his sole interest, music? Was he athletically inclined? Did he like another form of entertainment, the arts, or was it strictly music?
He was a very gifted artist from the time he was even 2 years old. I guess people noticed. Teachers have said that he was a really fine artist, and that's what they remember about him even as a kid in kindergarten, that he could draw very well. And his art teacher in high school said he would have been an excellent graphic artist had he chosen to pursue that.
Portraits or otherwise?
Otherwise, he wasn't too prone to discipline, even in something that he enjoyed that much. So his
been years since Cobain went to school here, but some kids can still understand his alienation.
Our town is very cliquey, you know what I mean? If you're not somebody, you know, then you're not. I mean, people will give you a hard time here.
Cobain's teenage years were troubled, to say the least. In fact, after being kicked out of high school and skipping from home to home, a 17-year-old Cobain spent some time living in a homemade fort underneath this Aberdeen bridge.
It was during this time Cobain found a way out: music.
The phone's been ringing off the hook, and, you know, it's been Nirvana headquarters here since yesterday. Both Chris and Kurt took their first guitar lessons right upstairs around the corner here. There's a lot of musicians around here. I mean, it goes back to, you know, in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, Patrick Simmons graduated, you know, from the Doobie Brothers, graduated from Aberdeen High School. You know, it seemed like there's always been something musically going on.
It rains so much around here and there's nothing else to do, so you start playing guitar, you know.
Brian Coakley used to work at Rose Beers, the only place in town for aspiring musicians. But Cobain's music wasn't what the locals were used to. Neither were his offbeat pranks.
I heard weird stuff about him. He'd show up to a gig with his neck painted red one time. I guess to just piss off the rednecks.
He knew what he had to say, and he said it, whether people liked it or not.
Some in this small town, it is hard to understand why it ended the way it did.
There was a way out for Kurt, but he never found it.
Our guest is Warren Mason, who had the privilege and I'm sure the honor of being the guitar teacher, the first and only guitar teacher of Kurt Cobain. And Warren, a little bit about Kurt and how this all started, how it came about that you instructed him on playing the guitar.
Well, it started back in, I think it's about 1980, 1981. And I was playing in a little three-piece band I had, and my drummer's name was Chuck Friedenberg, and he was Kurt Cobain's uncle. He was his mother's brother, and he was the drummer, and he was bringing Kurt over to band practice to get him interested in playing the drums, to give him something constructive to do because of the breakup between the mom and the dad, and Kurt was depressed and all that, I guess.
How old was he at this time?
He was small for his age. I thought he was about 11, but you know how looking at people is deceptive, so I think he was, we were figuring it out through a few interviews that I've done, that he was probably around 13 or 14 at that time.
Did you see the super talent that he ended up being at that time?
No, I didn't. I didn't get a chance to see it.
What did you think his future entailed?
Well, I can tell you what happened.
Please.
He, during band practice, he didn't really pay much attention to the drums. He was kind of sparkling over at the guitar. And after about three weeks of practice, him coming over and watching and doing that, his uncle brought him over to take guitar lessons from me. And so he had this real piece of junk guitar, and I got him. I got a hold of a friend of mine down in San Francisco, which was where I had moved up from back in '79. I moved from San Francisco up to Aberdeen. I was just like an old ex-Haight-Ashbury person, and I got him this guitar. He was left-handed, so I had to restring it backwards and redo the nut and the bridge and that. And it was an old Flying V copy, just an old cheapo thing, but it was way better than what he had. And he was, I always asked my students what their main goal was, what style they wanted to play like, and a short-term goal they could set, you know, as a song they would like to learn or something.
Did he?
For him, it was Stairway to Heaven.
Did he try to emulate any guitar player in particular, or emulate you, for example, where you were teaching him?
There's one thing I noticed that he did remember that I told him was I would tell people, my students, the ones who had any comprehension of understanding anything. I mean, you know, some of the students I had were just all they wanted to do is like bang out screaming Metallica stuff, and you couldn't really talk to them because that's all they had on their mind. Or else they had the little kids who were drug in by their mothers to take lessons. But then you had other receptive people like Kurt, and he would listen. You know, he was a real good listener. And I explained to him what music is tension and release. You know, as the opposite of, say, Metallica and the screaming heavy metal. And that's one thing I really noticed in their band, in their songs, his songs, was they had breathing space. You know, and I think that was one of their big selling points, was because everybody's being raged, you know, by Megadeth and all these bands that just da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, over and over. And then Nirvana came out and they had that breathing space, and they had a little bit of the punk raw energy and the old Beatles raw energy and a little bit of the Beatles mixed in that I could see. And
did you think he was a troubled teenager at that time? I mean, was he pretty much in control of himself? I mean, did you ever foresee that someday down the road that he would commit suicide?
Oh, no. He was just beaming when he was at his guitar lessons. You know, he was really happy. What I kind of figured out talking to a few other interviewers was that was maybe the happiest part of his life, was taking guitar lessons and doing something he wanted to do. I didn't know that he was depressed at home and that, you know, because Chuck never really talked about that. He just told him he was going to give him guitar lessons and he'd pay for it and give him something constructive to do, you know, and I didn't really even think about, you know, if things were that bad for him or that he was that depressed, you know.
When did he form the band? How far down the road after you started him on the road to success did he put a band together?
I don't know. I lost contact with him. I didn't really see him. His uncle moved away. Chuck, the drummer, he had to quit. He was with the Army Corps of Engineers, and he had to quit because of his work was sending him over to Hawaii. And, Kurt lasted about 3 months in lessons, and then his mom made him stop because his school grades were falling so bad. I guess all he was doing was playing his guitar and not doing his homework, so they took him out of guitar lessons.
What band or bands do you think had the biggest influence and impact on his particular style?
The Beatles. That was one of his big influences back then. That was one of my big influences. I usually told my students who my influences were Jimi Hendrix, Beatles, and blues, mainly blues in general. And then he kind of, I think, took that. I made him a tape of a lot of various different things, you know, Jimi Hendrix, old blues stuff. There's a mixture of a lot of stuff I liked to get kids to listen to it and to see if there's anything in there they would like. And it's stuff that you don't really hear on the radio much at all. Some of it you don't hear at all on the radio. And then he took that in, and then he got into the punk thing. The Melvins, I know, are a big influence on him. And I'm not sure what other bands beside that.
Warren, I want to thank you very much. I know it must be very difficult for you having trained him, and he became so successful, and have it end the way it did. I'm sure that...
That was a shock. The way I found out was I got a call from a Seattle newspaper and started talking, and I thought it was a guy going to hit me up for a subscription. I was getting ready to, you know, figuring out how I was going to politely say no and cut the thing off, and then he starts mentioning Kurt, and I said, well, you know, I've already done an interview for Kurt. You know, after he made it big, I was getting calls, and the guy who wrote the book, Come As You Are, had called me a couple times in Rolling Stone magazine, and I said, well, I already, you know, I've done these interviews about Kurt and that, and he says, oh, you haven't heard, huh? And I said, no. And he told me, and so I just kind of silent there for a minute.
Pain are clearly and dramatically improving. Yesterday has been hospitalized at the Rome Medical Hospital in a state of deep coma and respiratory failure. Today he is recovering from the pharmacological coma due not to narcotics but the combined effect of alcohol and tranquilizer that had been regularly prescribed by a doctor.
The electrician was going to do some repair work. He went up to above the garage where there's a small cottage above the garage, and when he looked inside he saw a man lying on the floor. It was obvious this man is dead from a shotgun wound to the head. Now there was a suicide note left inside the house.
There was a note, there was a planter that had been dumped upside down in the dirt, had root balled and was laying there on the counter with a full-size sheet of paper, the pin stuck through it that was a suicide note, apparently, from what the officer said.
Did you get a chance to read it?
I only read the bottom lines on it. The bottom two lines said, I love you to someone.
It's really, what is really interesting is that a lot of the younger kids that are calling, I don't think have ever experienced anything, and they're young. I mean, we're talking, 12, 11, 12, 13. Have never experienced anything like this before, even though there's violence and death in the papers every day. Somebody like Kurt Cobain going, it doesn't compute.
From the best spiritual place you can, for his sake, because he doesn't want to be known for being a drug addict, and he doesn't want to be known for being a loser or anything that Rush Limbaugh called him. We all know what he gave to us, and those baby boomers are not supposed to understand, That's what people like Rush Limbaugh and Andy Rooney exist for, Kurt, to irritate them. He touched all of our lives, and that's people over 32, they're not meant to understand what Kurt was, like I said, he was put here to irritate them. These people grew up in the 60s with the generation gap, and now they're really pissed that there's another one, because they refuse to grow old, and something good can come out of Kurt's death. I don't know what it is yet, but something good can. Something good can. I mean, Kurt changed the music industry completely. He turned it on its ass, He changed the way, if it had happened to me, Kurt would be sitting out here in this park with you too. He never made himself inaccessible to people. He never, ever did any rock star bullshit. If you stopped him on the street, even if you looked like you just stepped off an airplane, you're a stewardess, he'd still have talked to you for 10 minutes. He was like so good that way and had no attitude, and I wish he'd had a little more attitude, because that might have helped. But what would have helped more than anything was no guns. So just try and do that, all right? All right. Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm making you more upset. I don't really know what to say. I feel the same way you guys do. If you guys don't think that I used to sit in this room when he played guitar and sang, I feel so honored to be near him. You're crazy. Anyway, he left a note. It's more like a letter to the editor. I don't know what happened. I mean, it was gonna happen, but it could have happened when he was 40. He always said he was gonna outlive everybody and be 120. I'm not gonna read you all the note because it's none of the rest of your business, but some of it is to you. I don't really think it takes away his dignity to read this, considering that it's addressed to most of you. He's such an asshole. I want you all to say asshole really loud. This note should be pretty easy to understand. All the warnings from the Punk Rock 101 curses over the years since my first introduction to the, shall we say, ethics involved with independence and the embracement of your community has proven to be very true. I haven't felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing something for too many years now. I feel guilty beyond words about these things. For example, when we're backstage and the lights go out and the manic roar of the crowd begins, it doesn't affect me the way in which it did for Freddie Mercury, who seemed to love and relish in the love and adoration from the crowd. Well, Kurt, so f***ing what? Then don't be a rock star, you asshole. Which is something I totally admire and envy. The fact is, I can't fool you, any one of you. It simply isn't fair to you or to me. The worst crime I can think of would be to pull people off by faking it and pretending as if I'm having 100% fun. No, Kurt, the worst crime I can think of is for you to just continue being a rock star when you hate it and just stop. Sometimes I feel as I should have a punch-in time clock before I walk out on stage. I've tried everything within my power to appreciate it, and I do. God, believe me, I do, but it's not enough. I appreciate the fact that I and we have affected and entertained a lot of people. I must be one of those narcissists who only appreciate things when they're alone. I'm too sensitive. Oh. I need to be slightly numb in order to regain the enthusiasm I once had as a child. On our last 3 tours, I've had a much better appreciation of all the people I've known personally and as fans of our music, but I still can't get out the frustration, the guilt, and the empathy I have for everybody. There's good in all of us, and I simply love people too much. So why didn't you just stay? So much that it makes me feel too sad. The sad, little, sensitive, unappreciative Pisces Jesus man. Oh, shut up, Pastor. Why don't you just enjoy it? I don't know. Then he goes on to say personal things to me that are none of your damn business. Personal things of Francis that are none of your damn business. I have it good, very good, and I'm grateful. But since the age of 7, I've become hateful towards all humans in general, only because it seems so easy for people to get along and have empathy. Empathy. Only because I love and feel for people too much, I guess. Thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach for your letters and concern during the last years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody person, and I don't have the passion anymore. Peace, love, empathy, Kurt Cobain. And then there's some more personal things that are none of your damn businesses. And just remember, this is all bullshit. And I'm laying in our bed. And I'm really sorry. And I feel the same way you do. I'm really sorry, you guys. I don't know what I could have done. I wish I'd have been here. And I wish I hadn't listened to other people. But I did. Every night I've been sleeping with his mother, and I wake up in the morning, I think it's him, because our body's sort of the same. I have to go now.